Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and we are going cultural, political today in the United States, Brandon, Florida. I am truly honored to have Jim Glover on the show today. How are you doing, Jim?
Very good. Welcome to Florida. Yeah.
Where is Brandon? Is it up in the peninsula or up in the?
It's just east of Tampa. It's kind of a suburb of Tampa.
Okay, got it. All right, great. Well, first, a little bit about Jim. Jim is very modest these days. I went to his Facebook, and there's almost nothing there, but I can tell you that I have learned a lot about him in the last few months. He, back in the 1960s, had a popular career as a singer-songwriter, and he can tell you more about it later. He's a very much anti-imperialist, anti-war. And he's the first guest I've ever had on the show who said, "I don't care if I sell any records, but anymore." I'm happy not to be having to sell records anymore. But anyway, I'll let him tell you all.
That's good. I agree.
Anyway, I will list here his email, his Facebook. He does have a YouTube channel, and if you just type in Jim Glover and YouTube, he's actually got a bunch of songs on there. So anyway, thank you so much for being on the show today, Jim.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. There's another Jim Glover Chevrolet guy in Texas. A lot of times I'll get that when I'm looking for me. You know.
Need to buy a Camaro?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Hey, listen.
Well, the car I got now is working fine. Good old Japanese car.
There you go. Well, listen, let's go ahead and get started. Jim, please tell us about yourself growing up and your arc of awareness about Western Empire.
Oh, yeah.
I understand your father was a socialist. You were born in 19...
Well, he was farther left than a socialist.
He was a communist.
Yeah. He didn't carry a card. He was called. They used to call him fellow travelers.
A fellow traveler.
Yeah, that's the word. And so he was. He married my mom in Columbus, Ohio, at Ohio State University. That's where they met. My mom was Jewish, and her folks came from Russia, Poland, and which is now Belarus. And they were very radical too. My grandparents on my mom's side, my grandmother considered herself a Bolshevik, but they came over after the first Russian Revolution, when
in 1917.
Well, they came over after the 1905 revolution.
Oh wow, unbelievable.
Yeah. My mom was born here in 1913, so
oh my gosh,
she was born before the real revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution.
Wow, that's amazing.
So anyway, so I was born September 5th, 42 on Labor Day. So for communist parents, that was, I guess, that was quite a thing, a big deal, being born on Labor Day. That must have been a pain to my mom. I was like over 10 pounds. So she said, "You weren't even supposed to be born." But I, it was wild growing up with that under, the McCarthy era and all that stuff, and so my dad was involved with the Communist Party with Gus Hall. He was Gus Hall's lieutenant, and so I would get, when I was a kid, I would Well, the first thing I remember about politics was this guy. It was actually Alan Dulles. Remember him?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, he went with his club foot, and his pipe, acting like Sherlock Holmes. And he says, I was about 1947. I was about 5 years old. So this was just before the CIA was set up, and he had his own private agency. I figured out later on. I read up loud about him. So he said, Jim, come on downstairs, So I go down there, and my dad is throwing all these papers into the furnace down the basement, So I'm standing right between my dad and Alan Dulles, and he's giving my dad orders and says, Jim, never forget this, And what's he trying to prove? I'm supposed to be seeing something I'm not supposed to be seeing or something. And so later on, I asked my dad what it was about, years later, and he says, well, that was about, his name was Jacques Leblanc. He was a communist from France, and I remember he didn't even have a French accent, and, and I saw him, he was limping up the stairs, and then he lights up his pipe outside, and he's giving my dad orders what to do next, And so my dad takes me on his rounds, and then I meet some people, that he takes me around on stuff, and it was I think it was stuff like that, and then stuff started happening where Alan Dulles, I think the reason why he wanted my dad to burn records was, I asked my dad, before he died, I said, communists wouldn't want you to burn their records. They'd be proud to have membership. He was burning the membership records, and my dad said, yeah, you're very perceptive. So I think what it was Alan Dulles. He himself later was being accused as a communist. So was Eisenhower. It's crazy. So, but he wanted to get rid of all the agents who were infiltrating. He wanted to get rid of their names because they had completely infiltrated the Communist Party. They knew everything. My dad was doing. They knew everything Gus Hall was doing. They knew where he was and what they were. Our house was bugged. Our telephone was tapped. They knew everything that was going on.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah. So once they were I was having trouble with all this stuff. Gus Hall was hiding upstairs in my in bedroom upstairs. They put me upstairs in the attic, and there was some guy, some friend of his, some creepy guy. They were talking about the revolution and everything, and this Gus Hall was saying, well, there's not going to be any revolution until things really, really get bad, and this guy with him, I think he was a spy, and he was a Jewish guy too. Gus Hall was Jewish too, and but he was. So I was saying, well, listen, I'm related to Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and all these kings of England. So I was like saying, what is all this about, revolution? I knew there was, they were talking about something was secret and something was really weird. So this guy that was with Gus got real mad at me, for saying that, and then Gus kind of told him to kind of be quiet and lay off me and everything like that. So.
And how old were you when all this was going on?
Oh, about 5 years old.
Unbelievable.
I remember on my fifth birthday, I wanted my hero was Roy Rogers, and Superman. So I wanted my fifth birthday. I'm with my dad, and I'm going, Dad, so what do you want for your birthday? I said, well, I want some Roy Rogers cap guns, gun outfit, 2 guns. That
yeah, with the caps.
Oh, what do you want that for? Yeah, right. And I said, why do you want those? Well, he's my hero, you see. And then I asked my dad said, I asked my dad, who's your hero? And he said, well, my hero is Abraham Lincoln and Joseph Stalin. So I heard about Joseph Stalin then, I guess. And really weird stuff. And then the reason why I wanted to, I was talking about Roy Rogers. It's so weird. I was there once, and these all these men came over to the house. This was Stella, I know, it's about 5 years old. And the maid there, we had a maid, and she goes, Jim, go outside. Men are coming. Go outside and hide, you know.
Unbelievable.
So I go outside, and I hide under the porch, and I see these men are coming, you know, and they were looking around for me too. I guess they knew what was going on, and they got me from under the porch, and they're going, kind of roughing me up. Where's the key, Jim? Where's the key? I didn't know what they were talking about. The key to what, you know, but I guess the maid had locked the door. I figured out so. And so this guy started pushing, where's the key? And then this other guy that was there, I think he was a friend of my uncle's or something, and he goes, Jim, tell him you buried it. And I said, oh, I buried it. There was a pile of dirt where we were digging for China when we were kids, you know. And so they start looking through the pile of dirt, you know. It was kind of weird, you know. And then I guess they got in the house, because then one of the guys said to me, he said, don't tell your folks about this, because these people will stop at nothing, you know. And I'm looking around, there's more guys coming down the street, you know, with these kind of English hats, these bowler hats that they wear, you know.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so, you know, with the umbrellas, you know, what the hell, you know. And so I just took off, you know, and I wanted to go get help from my dad, so I go down to the railroad tracks. I follow the railroad tracks where he worked, because he worked at the Railway Express agency, you know. And so I'm walking down the track. I see this dead dog there, and then all of a sudden, this neighbor, I guess, found me, because people were like, hey, where's Jim? I got lost, you know. So he found me and brought me back home. So he brings me back home, and the ceiling collapsed. It was a summer day. The whole ceiling fell in like 2 rooms of the house. And that was the day the ceiling fell in. And I'm trying to tell my story, and nobody believed me, you know. It was like, oh, the maid was scared, so she wasn't going to back me up. You know, so I guess what happened was they were looking for probably those records that my dad burned. And they were going through the attic, and probably the guys fell right through the damn ceiling, because there wasn't really a floor there, you know. In the part they were looking at. So that was the day the ceiling fell. My sister still remembers that. It was just so crazy, you know. It's crazy stuff.
Well, who do you think those guys were? Who do you think those guys were?
Oh, they're agents of some kind.
Okay.
Who knows? They could have been FBI, you know.
Yeah.
They could have been British agents, you know, whatever. Because the whole Communist Party was infiltrated by everybody. It wasn't just, you know, it was everybody. You know, everybody that was in the Cold War was into that. And this is, you know, 47. The new Cold War is really getting hot right now, you know.
Yeah.
And
unbelievable.
Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff I grew up with, and
well, who was Jacques Leblanc?
Oh, Jacques Leblanc. Yeah, Jacques Leblanc. That was Alan Dulles.
Oh, that was his
cover name.
Cover name.
Of course, he's not going to say my name is Alan Dulles. I'm with you. You know, I'm a big deal here. You know.
Okay, that was his alias.
Well, sure.
Oh, that's interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. My dad knew he was a spy. My sister said, you know, my dad knew Jacques Leblanc was a spy, but he never told me that until just before he died. I finally got it all straight with him, who Jacques Leblanc was. I said, man, that's Alan Dulles, the guy with the club foot and everything. And my dad finally started believing me about all this stuff very late, you know, and he says, well, Jim, you were right about. I used to say, Dad, you're more for the Russians than the Russians are, you know. And he would say, well, you know, I realize now they were very, very corrupt. I didn't realize that before, you know. And so he was always, you know. But before he died, he said, there's only 2 communists left in the world, Jim. This is, me and Fidel Castro. So he was true to his thing.
Unbelievable.
But he it's funny, you know, he didn't want anybody to know he was a communist. So, and they knew that. So that's why they could kind of do what they wanted with me. They felt like they owned me, and my dad wouldn't stand up for me. My parents were afraid. They were afraid they'd be exposed in what they were doing.
Blackmail, extortion.
Yeah, that's how it works.
That's blackmail, extortion,
people use
bribery,
kids.
and assassination.
Yeah. Kids are being used. Kids are used in this kind of shit. Yeah, we were victims, and everybody's a victim of the war. But kids, that was like, I was being told in school, the communists and the rest, they want you to spy on their parents. That's what communism is about. So they're telling me that when George Bush came to town, and this was in the early '50s, and he wanted me to spy on my folks, and
unbelievable.
He was a lot of times even George W. was with him. little George W. He was too small to play football with us, but it was all like starts out friendly stuff, My friend Johnny said, "Oh, this guy he likes us because he was watching us play football. We were playing tackle football in the park there."
Yeah. Back in the good old days. I did too. I did too.
Yeah, we were playing really, really kind of rough. I had a helmet and shoulder pads, and so the guy, my friend says, he really likes us and wants us to be in an Alan Ladd movie. And I go, what? So he said, yeah, you come over, and so he set an appointment with me, and I go over to his house there. This is in Willowick, and my friend Johnny's house, and his mom's there at the table, and she goes, yeah, he's in there room, and he wants to talk to you. So I'm thinking, what's this about, a movie deal? So I go in there, and the room's kind of dark, and the George Bush comes out with his dressed like Roy Rogers, and he starts talking to me about, the good guys wear the white hats, and the bad guys wear the black hats, and he goes, he starts talking about the spy. Forget the guy's. I always have a block about this guy's name.
Alger Hiss.
Alger Hiss. Yeah, Alger Hiss. And he starts talking about him, and he says, I know. See, there was this mystery where my grandfather died when I was over at my grandparents' house, my grandpa Cohen, and he came in, and the guys brought him in on a stretcher. I was sleeping on the porch, and they told me, go in your grandma's room, Jim, and they laid him out and on the porch, and then I go in there, and then I hear him yelling out on the porch. He goes, my grandpa, maybe he's having a heart attack. I don't know, but my grandmother goes out there, and then she comes back, and she's crying. She's looking through the drawer maybe for pills or whatever, and then my grandpa, that night, and then I heard somebody jump off the porch and run back into the garage. And I called this guy Garage Man, and I think he was the guy that was up with Gus Hall upstairs when he was getting mad at me for that. And so he used to hang out in the garage. And I think my grandpa kicked him down the stairs once, and he pulled a knife on my grandpa, and I picked up this brick, and the guy just walked away because I don't know. It was my so it was really saint. So George Bush was telling me, he says, we know. So my grandma was scared to talk about this. I was the only one who was there when Grandpa died. My grandma was there, but nobody else was. And then nobody knew how. There was all these stories about how he died. Nobody really knew. Somebody said he died on a streetcar. There's all these different stories, And then so the police came over, and my house, and when I went home, after he died and everything, I was at home. And then the cops came over, and then my uncle Sal came over, and he was crying. So the police wanted to know what happened, and nobody knew what happened, but nobody would talk to me, So I was just watching this, and I was the only one that knew what the hell was happening. So anyway, when Bush, that was like when I was like 5 years old. But then, so when I'm 10, 5 years later, Bush wants me to spy. So he's saying to me at Johnny's house, he's going, well, Jim, we know the neighbors heard somebody and called the police. Heard somebody jump down off the porch or whatever, heard something, called the police. So he knew what I was talking with. Must have had our place was bugged, so he knew what was going on, and my grandma was scared and everything, and so he said, well, we want you to keep, so what's this stuff about being in the movies? Well, there was nothing about that. This was all like, a bait and switch to get me to think I was going to help out solve my grandfather's death,
Wow, and this was in Ohio? Johnny's house was in Ohio?
Yes, in Willowick, Ohio.
Gosh.
Which is a suburb of Cleveland, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So George Herbert Walker Bush was there fighting communism.
Yep. Yeah, oh yeah.
And that would have been what, about 1952?
51, about 51, 52.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And so I was, I went over once and asked, I went home crying, when he wanted me to do this. My folks were somewhere, I don't know where they were, Haiti, or they went on vacation or something. My grandma was there. I told my grandma what happened. She said, the best is they started again, And I guess they started, I asked her many years later, when did they start? And she said, when Roosevelt died. So, so then I tried to, tell my folks what was going on. They didn't believe me. They didn't want to do anything. They were scared. Everything I did all my life, I scared people. That was like my mission. I guess it still is, because when I talk about the Kennedy assassination, I just scare people because they can't prove me wrong, and nobody wants to get involved ever. No, even today. Still, after all these years, people are afraid of it.
Wow.
So my dad. He didn't want to talk. So Johnny came over once on his bicycle, and he goes, "Well, that guy, man, he's just beating me with a strap." He's crying, and he goes, "Can your parents help me? Can your folks help me?" Because he said he told me, if I can't play with you anymore because your grandma is a bad person. Like
who was whipping him?
George Bush.
Unbelievable.
Was beating him with a strap. Yep. Maybe worse, but that's what I remember him crying about. And so I told my dad. He didn't know nothing, and he didn't want to do anything, So about helping Johnny out, and so I remember, and I went over and asked Johnny's mom. She was a real nice lady and used to make us hamburgers after school and everything. I said, why does he want me to spy? And she said, well, he's new in the oil business. His dad's a senator, and he thinks this is going to help him be president someday. This was back then. So
52.
He was doing this. Yeah, 51, 52. Yep, around there. Because that's when we went out west. Out west, we were driving out west, and all the way to we were driving all the way out to San Francisco. My folks were going out to visit a friend my mom knew out there, and so we're driving out west, and I'm trying to I keep telling my dad, do something about this guy. I was really upset that he wanted me to spy and everything. My parents were telling me, be quiet. My mom's saying, you need some discipline, Jim. And so we stop at this big kind of Western place, truck stop with corrals around it and mountains and everything. It was in Wyoming. My sister remembered it was in Wyoming, and so right after she tells me I need some discipline, I go out by the corral. I said, go out by the corral and look. I'm about there, and guess who walks up?
George Bush?
George Bush, yeah, out there in Wyoming. He was following us. Probably had our car bugged, for phone. And so he looked concerned. He says, Jim, are you all right? Okay. And I'm going, holy shit. I'm thinking, this is weird.
Unbelievable.
And yeah, it is. Yeah,
and he became
so anyway,
he became director of the CIA.
Well, yeah, sure.
Unbelievable.
And president. And so, but my dad wouldn't. I was really mad. I was going to my teachers and complaining to my teachers, and I'd say, why? This one guy he was my counselor there, and he knew my dad, and he's going, I said, what's going on? Why are they doing this? He said, well, because your parents are stooges for the Communist Party. Oh, shit. So then at least I knew what was going on, you know. But the FBI came over once because I guess I complained at school, and my teachers probably weren't concerned. But my dad wouldn't talk to the FBI. Go away, I'm not talking to you, you know. And so what happened, so my dad, I thought I was trying to turn Bush in, you know. I was trying to turn him in. It was like, I felt like this guy's really doing something like they tell me the communists are doing over in Russia, you know, spying on your parents. So anyway, my dad wasn't doing anything. So my dad was helping out George Bush in his political career, actually. And
well, go back to Wyoming. What happened when you were at the corral with Bush?
Well, yeah, he just said he just wanted to know if I was okay, and I said, well, yeah, okay. So I don't know what to say to him because I'm thinking, holy shit, my folks are in on this. You know?
Unbelievable.
So I didn't know what to do. I'm a kid, you know. I was very confused. I was upset. So that kind of shut me up. I didn't, you know, because that was like a wake-up call, you know. Holy shit, that's why my folks aren't going to do anything. And
unbelievable.
So, yeah. So there's a lot of stuff like that going on, you know. And, but that's, you know, so the FBI knew that I knew Bush. Yeah, my grandfather knew who Bush was. When I would go to Westerville and complain to them and everything, my parents were glad to get me out of the house because I was getting crazy about this. You know, I was banging my head against the couch. I was doing crazy things. It was making me nuts.
Where's Westerville?
Westerville is outside of Columbus.
Oh.
That's where they had the first Democratic debate there, just about a year ago or so, or for the debate amongst the Democrats was in Westerville. My grandfather's a professor there at Otterbein University, small college there in Westerville, Ohio. And so I'm asking him about who this guy was, and he said, "Well, he knew he was because he knew who the Bushes were, because they were in Columbus and they were, you know, kind of a big deal there." And my grandfather was telling me stories about how Prescott Bush, when he was a kid, came back from the First World War and claimed that he stuck his Bowie knife up and blocked a mortar shell, and then he made up this story, you know, and his mother said, "Yeah, it's crazy." So this was all in the papers, you know, about how Prescott Bush was trying to make himself out to be a hero after the First World War, you know, and so I found out more. And so I also found out that my dad wouldn't tell me this, but my uncle, his brother, did tell me that my dad's first job, my dad told me his first job out of high school was at this big country club. He was a lifeguard. When I found out that the country club was the one that was owned by Bush, by Prescott and Sam Bush. Sam was Bush's grandfather, George Bush's grandfather, but Sam was the starter of that big country club there in Columbus called the Scioto by the Scioto River.
So the Bushes got started in Ohio. I thought they always claimed they're from Connecticut and Texas.
Well, that was the thing. Prescott was from Ohio, from Columbus. Prescott is George's father.
Yeah.
Okay. So he had something to do with that country club too, I'm sure. And he knew my dad, you know, probably my mom too, because when I think Prescott, when we were doing an audition, Jim and Jean at Columbia Records, this tall guy, my mom was at the studio, which was, I don't know how she come in and she wanted to see our audition at Columbia Records, and then in walks this tall guy, and he's real mad and he's upset about something to the engineer, and when I saw pictures of Prescott Bush later, that's Prescott. So I think I think they knew, and so we didn't pass that audition. So we got a record deal with Philips Records after that. It was our first record deal. So what a crazy world, huh?
So, so did you know George W. Bush when you were growing up, or did you ever meet him?
Well, I saw him. Never really talked to him. He was so young. He was when I was playing football. He was about 5 or 6. I was about 9 or 10. He was about 4 years younger than me. So George wouldn't let him play with us, because he was too small. And so one time we were out at the I think this was the last time I saw him. It was even after the incident in Wyoming. He wanted some neighborhood kids to say, "Oh yeah, they really want you to play football again with them. Go on out," and so I go on out and so we're playing, and George is there with W. W's trying to tackle his dad, grabbing onto his legs, and George has this habit where he stick out his tongue, I saw him once fishing, and he had his tongue out, like, kind of half biting his tongue, and it's just kind of a thing he had. And so he was doing this while little W was trying to tackle him, and we were laughing at that, and so we got a big hit on it. And so I don't know if he got upset that we were laughing at him, but then he said, "Okay, we're going to make a game now." He said, "The next guy who carries the ball has to stick his tongue out like that, so like he did, So guess who's the next ball carrier? Me." So I'm running to get the ball. I'm running right into the line, and old Dave, he knew George, and he was trying to protect him. He comes up with his helmet, hits me right in the jaw. And my mouth was bleeding, huge blood. And so I go, oh no! So I get on my bike and I'm riding home. I go home, and I'll bet W remembers this. I still have a scar on my tongue. They put in a couple stitches in my tongue. My dad took me to the clinic, and stuff like that. So that was like I don't know if he did that on purpose to try to tell me to shut up, or whatever. But it turned out real bad for me. But it's a scar, and that's something I'll never forget. It's like crazy stuff. It's like the scar I got a bump on my back when this lady pushed me out of the window, and I think I know who the lady was. This was after the I figure after the guys came over and the roof fell in. That when I was about 5, and this was right after that. And I was when they told me, Jim, when those guys came in, were telling me not to talk to my parents. He said one guy was feeling sorry for me. He says, "Well, Jim, just pretend you're like your heroes. We're your heroes.
Roy Rogers.
Try to deal with
Roy Rogers.
Rogers and Superman. Yeah. So I'm upstairs and I'm in the bathroom, and I got I would used to try to make Superman costume. I got the towel wrapped around my neck, playing. And this lady comes in the bathroom. She goes, "I thought we told you to shut up," because I was telling my grandfather about this stuff before my grandfather died, and he was really upset. He was saying, "Well, it's the black hand." I thought he was saying the black hats, but my uncle told me, Jim, he was talking about the Black Hand. And there is an old Jewish mafia group called Black Hand. And so it was crazy stuff. So
she told you to shut up, and then what did she do?
Yeah, she pushed me up on the windowsill. And it was a high window. It wasn't on the second story, thank God. A high windowsill. And she pushed me up there, and I said, "Well, they said I could be like Superman, She told me to shut up, and I'm saying, "Well, they told me I could be like Superman." And she goes, "Oh, okay, let's see you fly." And she pushes me out the window, and I remember seeing the window go up. And my land on my back, and I remember my knees coming up, hitting my chest. And I'm laying there, oh man, oh. And this old guy comes up and he looks down at me. He's got an accent like my grandmother's, European accent. He goes, "Jim, it's so terrible. Your mother pushed you out of your own window, your own mother." He's just lying, putting shit in my head, screw me up.
But who do you think she was?
Well, I found out who she was.
Who was she?
She was Jean de Mohrenschildt, but she was Jean Lagon at the time. My mom was a dress designer too, and she was pretending to be a communist.
Well, she was an agent. She was an
she was an agent. De Mohrenschildt, Jean Lagon.
Legon.
Legon, yeah. And I found out who it was because I used to tell the story about the woman who pushed me out the window. And so after the Kennedy assassination, by the way, they set me up to see George on that too, and Hoover. I'm the only one who knows where Hoover was the day they shot JFK. And so I'm in Chicago. I used to tell my stories in Chicago about JFK and everything, and so this I'm telling the story, and this friend of where I was recording it, this friend of my engineer, she knew obviously who Giancana was, and this is before they killed Giancana. And she says, "Jim, I got a message from Mumu, and I don't know what she's talking about, but there was a nickname for Giancana was Mo, and Mooney Mo, Giancana." And he says, the message is, the lady that pushed you out the window was Jean de Mohrenschildt. And I'm going, I remember the name de Mohrenschildt for a little bit from the Kennedy assassination, because I remember my mom talking about, when she was reading about the Kennedy assassination, she says, "Well, this is de Mohrenschildt. That's really interesting, So anyway, I'm just wondering, how's that? All I remember is the lady was dark hair, she wasn't tall like my mom, and she was wearing riding pants, they stick out at the side where you put the hands in your pocket.
Yeah, like jod. Yeah, well, I think they call them jodhpurs or something like that. Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So, geez. So, years later, I'm up in Topeka Canyon, not Topeka. It was called the Old Canyon Road. Topeka Canyon, Old Topeka Canyon Road, and some,
Topanga.
Yeah. Topanga. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Topanga.
in Laurel Valley.
Topanga. Right. That's
in
where
Laurel
we lived,
Valley,
off the street there, and somebody told me, maybe it was a dealer or something I was buying grass from or something, I forget, who told me that this girl wants to meet you, and her name's de Mohrenschildt. I go, right. So I go to this house in Topanga Canyon, and this girl's there. She's dressed like kind of in this Baroque kind of style, and she had red hair. And I took her out and we started talking. She starts talking about her dad a little bit, and I'm talking about the Kennedy assassination because I figured it had something to do with that. And so then I didn't. I didn't see her anymore. But I remember she told me her name was Chris, but she made a point of saying it's spelled with a K, Chris with a K. And I found out later that she's the daughter of Jean Lagon. So in other words, George Dimencio was her stepfather, and so she probably got some information off me, and she didn't tell me much, but she probably wanted to know what was going on about her mom and everything. Her mom and George, they knew that. So I don't really hold anything against her. You know, she was just doing her job as a spy, and but they knew that Oswald was being set up, and they helped set him up. And they didn't believe that Oswald shot Kennedy.
Yeah.
And I don't think he did it. I think he was a patsy, and you don't become a patsy overnight. And anyway, I've researched this thing backwards and forwards, and I think Oswald was up there with other men, and he didn't bring the rifles to work that day because it was the guy who drove him to work, Buell Wesley Fraser, maintains to this day that there was no rifle in that little small package, broken down or whatever. It wasn't even broken down, wasn't it? So
who, Fraser?
So, yeah, Buell Fraser. You know,
oh, Buell.
Buell. Wesley Fraser. Wesley Buell Fraser's his name. Wesley is his first name.
Okay.
He was. He's the guy who used to drive Oswald to work and helped him get a job at the book depository through Ruth Payne. And so you know, he was a patsy. So they wouldn't trust him to bring the rifle, you know, because he was a patsy. So he didn't bring a rifle. Well, sure.
And I'll splice this all together.
Yeah, you don't become a patsy overnight. That's
yeah.
They were watching when I was on the Hollywood Hootenanny tour. They knew that I knew about the plot because Phil Ochs told me about it, and months before it happened. And so I was interested in it. They wanted me to go on this tour, and Phil told me not to go. And I said, why? And I said, well, I heard that President Kennedy is going to be killed in the South. And Phil was suspicious of this tour, and they go, yeah, that's why I want you to go, Jim. So I'm figuring, these guys are, Phil was working for National Security. He told me when he came over, and he told me about the plot. He said he was working with a special group. It's kind of like the CIA, National Security. You know, they always said Bush used to say National Security too, when he said who he's working for. So that's kind of like a generic term. You know, there's probably probably a lot of agencies all mixed in, and they got you for a special thing. You know, you're a special deal. So Bill said, the bad guy, Hoover's the bad guy, and there's this war going on with the military and Hoover and whatever, and it was more than that. Actually, there was a big divide even within the CIA. I read just before Kennedy died. There was the CIA was he didn't. They try to portray everybody was against Kennedy, but he had friends in the CIA too. So that may be why they wanted me. Besides it being a patsy because of my dad, they could say I knew too much.
Blame. Well, they made sure that Oswald was a communist too, so he went to Cuba and all that crap.
Yeah, I'm not even sure he was a real communist. I think he was. He could have been just acting the part. And that's what I believe now from Judith Baker's story, and because she's written many books on it, and a lot of people don't believe her, but I haven't found. She exaggerates, and she has wishful thinking about it because Oswald was her lover in New Orleans and everything. And they were working on a project to kill Castro. That's the story, and I haven't found anybody to disprove it yet. That Oswald and Judith Baker and David Ferry and this Dr. Oshner and Mary, what's her name, the monkey, the lady Mary Sherman, I think her name was, were working on a biological cancer thing to kill Castro. So she worked with this cancer even right out of high school. She was like a genius, a Judith Baker, and they were, using animals and killing mice every day and giving them tumors, and they would collect these tumors and blah blah blah. And so Oswald was supposed to go down, and that's why he supposedly went down to Mexico to try to give this drug, this bioweapon to contact down there, but it never panned through, never happened. So the whole thing could have been set up as a test just to get them involved in the crazy thing. But so Judith says they actually had to test this bioweapon on 2 black prisoners. So they tested it, and they went to the hospital, and she said the guy was really sick, and she was certain that he was going to die, and she was, she was all proud of the fact that she made it so that they would have to give X-rays to make the cancer thing even more stronger. And so they were, they were telling her, this is going to save us from nuclear war, because if you don't kill Castro, we'll have to kill Kennedy. Crazy stuff, and she was naive. She believed it, and went along with it.
Where were these black prisoners, in the U.S.? Yeah. They were in they went to this hospital, I think it was around Clinton. They went up to around Clinton, Louisiana, or, in that area. Wasn't far from Louisiana, from New Orleans. Okay.
So the prisoners died. So actually, I'm thinking, gee, this is a murder plot. So they actually, this is, they're involved in murder. So now they really got something on Oswald. Because,
they can extort
the CIA, if they're involved, they're not going to admit to anything like this. Are you kidding?
And they can extort him too.
Yes, so that's how they made it. So the story is that he tells her at the Cats and Jammer, this club there, he's telling his girlfriend Judith Baker, wow, they're telling me now they're going to kill me because of the cancer project. So that's what he was really scared about, that they were involved in this murder project, because he's not stupid. So they had this over him. So that's what I think they're really had him by the to do what so he had to go along with this being a patsy. So I think they wouldn't. So they on the bus. They were watching me every minute. They were checking make sure all my mail had to go through the managers of the tour. They even had Jean, my wife. She was talking me into the tour. So So anyway, so I found out after they killed Kennedy on my way back. I thought I was going to be killed that night at a very isolated motel in the Sam Houston National Forest, where they killed the guy who was another Oswald lookalike. They had him in the bus, and this was after Bush and Hoover and a bunch of other people got off the bus. We picked them up they hijacked this bus, Hollywood Hootenanny Tour bus, and this was right after they told me Kennedy was dead. And these agents were looking at me for my reaction. I didn't say nothing. Then they wouldn't let me get back on a bus with the musicians. And this guy had my hands behind my a hammerlock, and he was saying, "Jim, be quiet." And these teenagers surrounded me, wouldn't let me get back on the bus. So I'm yelling at the bus, "Remember this," when it left. And then this other bus comes, and so I'm thinking, what do I run? Where do I go? They know who I am. I don't know who the hell they are. But I felt like, oh shit, are they going to kill me tonight? So I get back on that bus, and that bus. This is right after I learned Kennedy was dead. This for around Houston, and so that bus goes, and then the regular driver, they got rid of him. They kicked him off the bus. It was a uniform driver, and these guys, they look like Latino soldiers. I don't know what country they're from or anything like that. But anyway, they
probably
took over the driving.
Probably Cuban fascists.
Yeah,
from
could be.
Miami.
You know, yeah,
from Miami.
Sure. Yeah, or whatever. And so then they're driving for a while, and the guys they said I looking forward and seeing there's a big wide open space, like a big concrete. When we were driving, right, there was nothing there. It was like you're driving. Well, it turns out it was an airstrip, and it was probably at the Houston airport where they had what they called a through the fence airport. So they had the public and the private, where you could drive from the public into the private. And the guy saying, "Okay, everybody, bust down. Everybody, pull down your blinds. Pull down your blinds so that nobody can see inside the bus." And everybody was just following orders. I followed orders. Somebody in the back says, "We're at an airport," and then all these guys got on. And so the guy was David Ferry lookalike. You know, I was supposed to know who David Ferry was because back in Cleveland. This was David, the real David Ferry, wanted to talk to me, you see. And my friend who would always tell me when the FBI was asking about me, I had friends who would tell me the FBI was asking about me. And they said that when, I heard that this guy wanted to talk to me, and so I go into the schoolyard, and he's barking orders at these kids, you know, probably Civil Air Patrol. And so I'm going, what the hell is this all about? And then somebody says, don't you watch out, Jim, because he's you know, they didn't say gay, he said homo. That's what they used to say back in those days, you know, homo. So anyway, I was warned. So I didn't want to talk to this guy. Why would I want to talk? You know, I knew something was crazy because my whole life had been crazy at that point. Right? I mean, that's still crazy. So anyway, so I didn't know, you know, who the fuck was that guy? Nobody knew, you know. So it was years later when after the Kennedy assassination, I'm going for my last physical. They kept wanting me to go to, you know, take a physical to get drafted, and I was telling the guy, you know, I know who killed Kennedy. You guys did. Give me a rifle. I don't know who will shoot. The guy put down psychotic, you know. And then I went for about 3 or 4 physicals, and each time I would just barely, you know, they put me down 1Y, you know, because I was taking drugs and everything, trying to pass, not trying to fail it, because I didn't want to go into numb. You know, so anyway, so I stopped and saw my friend who was always telling me about, he said, well, Jim, the FBI said they don't know what to do with you. And I said, why? And he said, because you know too many people. And this was back when I was in high school. So anyway, so this is about, many years later, my physical last draft physical.
42, 52, probably right around 1960. Yeah. 1960.
So he says, you know that guy that wanted to talk to you in the parking lot in the schoolyard? Yeah, who was that? He said the FBI told me that was David Ferry. So I'm supposed to know David Ferry, see? Okay. And I found out from the FBI who he was. So anyway, now it's the afternoon of the Kennedy assassination, late afternoon. We're at the airport in Houston, and these guys get on the bus, and I hear all this rumbling around with the luggage compartment underneath the bus. And first guy I see sits down right in front of me. How's the trip, Jim? And he's got, you know, this wig that didn't fit, like a reddish wig, and he's and it looked like he was bald underneath the wig, and he's got these eyebrows that are fake, you know, and they were like mohair eyebrows, kind of, you know, just pasted on, thick, not painted, but actually, you know, he looked like a you know, a sad clown, some crazy. And he goes, how's the trip, you know, and then then other people are getting on, and he turns around and he says, "Do you know that guy getting on the bus now?" And he's pointing to the guy just getting on. And I didn't. I found out late after in the pit stop, he's pointing to George Bush. I don't know if I knew him.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And then another thing he asked me is, why was British intelligence asking about you? I didn't say a word to this guy. I was just totally, the smartest thing I did that day was the only day in my life where I kept my mouth shut, and that's why I got out of there alive, I'm sure, if I would have said anything.
What happened after everybody got on the bus at the Houston airport, in the private area of the Houston airport?
Well, right. So all these weird guys, the blonde lady up there was Barbara, because they were Bush called the FBI that day from Tyler, Texas, where he was giving a speech. So he tipped off and Hoover was in Texas. He was. I'm the only guy that knows where Hoover was, and so Bush is sitting right next to Hoover, and the blonde lady was on my left when I got back on the bus, and I'm wondering who is he? She was dressed real nice, but that was Barbara. She had her hair dyed like Marilyn Monroe style, platinum blonde that day, and I've got a picture of her. The Bush family say, well, she never dyed her hair, but I got a picture of her as a platinum blonde in '64 with her daughter Dorothy next to her, and her daughter was about 4 or 5 years old right then. And so I go, oh wow, I finally found. Because I was always looking for pictures of Barbara Bush. I figured that was Barbara with George, because I read the whole story about his speech, and she wrote a whole story about where they were that day, and I could never find a picture. All the old pictures of Barbara was brown hair, and all of a sudden I found it on this website that does old pictures, and wow, there it is. And I showed it to my girlfriend Jean Hewitt, and she goes, yeah, and she's got dark roots. Well, sure, she had dark roots, because this was about 4 months after assassination when she took that picture. The picture was for when George was running for the Senate in '64. Then she changed her hair. She's probably wondering why the hell she was doing on that bus, but she didn't say anything about the bus in her story. She was smart enough not to do that. But so the bus picked him up, and also who got on was these Dallas cops. Now this was Houston. Dallas cops in uniform have an Oswald lookalike. Now there were several Oswald lookalikes. This guy had tears in his eyes. They set him down right across the aisle from me. They had a cowboy hat, one of those cop, Texas police used to wear these cowboy hats, Stetson hats, and they had it pulled down over his head real tight, kind of hide his appearance. And later on, they took the cop took his hat back, and I could see he had a real short crew cut, military style crew cut. So that was, and then there were other people on the bus, and so anyway, the bus started going around in circles, and we passed the same place twice. And my buddy there, Tumbleweed Tom, he was sitting next to me for a while, and as we passed this place before, didn't we? So I think there was only about from George Bush's was only about 20 minutes away from the airport, his house. And so they dropped him off. I think probably Hoover got off there at the same time, because Hoover and Bush were talking. And so that night, somebody came into my room. Now they had my wife Jean is staying at a motel across from this National Guard Armory on the other side of it, and our motel was very isolated. And these guys, when we first went in there, these guys were all celebrating, at the bar. And I go, wow, I better call my dad now, And I called my dad, and he goes, where are you? And I go, I'm in. I said, did you hear about the assassination? Yeah. He says, where are you? And I go, I don't know. So I turned around, and these guys are at the celebrating, at the bar and at these tables. I said, where are we? And they go, Dallas. You're in Dallas. So I tell my dad I'm in Dallas, and he always remembers that. Calling from Dallas. And so I look out there, outside, and it's totally black. You don't see a light anywhere. It's a totally isolated place out in the woods. And they just wanted me to tell everybody I was in Dallas.
Okay.
Pretty clever,
Yeah, to
so I just set myself up, but
incriminate you. Okay.
Well, sure, I'm not gonna, I just wanted to live through this thing. So that night, a guy comes into one of the managers. He said, Jim, don't go outside. There's a guy with a shotgun. He's looking for the guy who shot President Kennedy. So I better stay inside. Because they told me when I left on this tour, it's dangerous. Don't write anything down and don't interfere. Remember the three things they told me. Don't interfere. Don't write anything down. I didn't interfere, and that's why I'm telling you the story. Otherwise, I'd been dead a long time ago. So don't go outside. And so anyways, they're celebrating all night long, hooping and hollering like they're having a big, hunt out there for this guy. And then I hear shotgun blasts. And then it got real quiet that night. There was nothing in my room, no TV, no nothing, no radio. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who the hell Oswald was. I didn't know anything about that. And so the next day, I woke up and there's this guy dressed like he was supposed. I was supposed to think he's David Ferrie because he was disguised, with that fake wig and fake eyebrows. That's could only be David Ferrie. So for many years, I said, well, that was David Ferrie. In all my stories, But then when I start talking to Judith Baker and people that knew David Ferrie, they said David Ferrie didn't have freckles. This guy was big. He wasn't a little guy like you think. He didn't look sickly. He looked like kind of commanding appearance about him, personality. And he was a hefty guy. And he had freckles all in the back of his neck and all over his face. That reminded me of Fred Neil, this singer friend of mine who was famous for his freckles. And so I ask everybody who knew Dave Ferrie. Dave Ferrie didn't have freckles. So then I knew this was an imposter. Because David Ferrie, he was the first guy they talked about after the Kennedy assassination. He was mentioned, as being a suspect. So it was all set up. And I would, they were trying to make me crazy because I would say David Ferrie was on the bus, and everybody knew David Ferrie wasn't. Because the next day he was, in fact, the day of this Kennedy assassination, he was in New Orleans at the trial of Carlos Marcello, who he was working for. And Carlos Marcello was being prosecuted by RFK, and he got away with it. They were trying to deport him again, and he was okay. So then the next day, David Ferrie did take off around the Houston area that night, but he drove. The story is he drove all night in the rain and ended up making calls from a roller skating rink. So that wasn't the day. The David Ferrie lookalike was the guy who was trying to throw me off and wanted to know if I knew George Bush and wanted to know why British intelligence was asking questions about me. So the next day, that David Ferrie lookalike was loading, trying to arrange all the luggage in the bus for the trip home. They told me, that the trip's over now. The Hootenanny tour is over. And Gene came and talked to me at right beside where the National Guard Armory was, and she says, "Yeah, I heard shots that night." And I said, "Isn't it weird?" She says, "It's weird." Yeah, it was weird. The phone prefix I noticed was Garfield, of assassinated president. So we both remembered that. So we know what the prefix was. of the place, and on the phone, on the payphone, where I called my dad, and she noticed that too. And well, we got on the way back. I'm going, what? I thought, are they going to kill him? Well, they haven't killed me yet. And so Gene was not on that same bus I was on. They put me on with other people, and these two agents were sitting in front of me, talking on their radios. And I thought, geez, are these guys going to kill me? You know. And so I got up the courage to ask one of them. I said, well, who shot Kennedy? Who shot President Kennedy? And he turned around. The guy was real nice, you know, like he knew that I was there for a reason or something. He goes, well, we were talking to Hoover, and he points up, right up where Hoover was sitting the day before. And he says, Hoover said that it was a test that went bad, and it wasn't the Cubans. He mentioned the test went bad and it wasn't the Cubans. He said other things, but that's what I remember, because I was suspecting the Cubans. Of course, everybody was. And I said, "What are you, FBI?" And he goes, "No, I'm with NASA, a NASA agent." Now that's what he said. Now the other guy, I don't know. The other guy might have been a DIA agent that Hoover. The next day, Hoover had a memo. This came out just before the Bush elections in '88. That the memo said that Hoover's saying that the State Department thinks this is the day after the Kennedy assassination. It's probably what he was talking to Bush about on the bus, because Bush was his code name was White Rose, and he was involved in that Bay of Pigs thing. And so he says the State Department says that they think that the Kennedy assassination was a pretext so that there would be a new invasion of Cuba, which was pretty smart on the State Department's point. So Hoover had to nix that immediately. So he calls his friend in his informant in Miami, who says, we have a reliable informant. Of course, he wouldn't give his name, but probably it's known. Says that, oh no, the Miami Cubans loved Kennedy. They were very happy with what he was doing, which is bullshit. And so, so in other words, that whole thing about the State Department, they're looking into this. So Hoover had to nix that out real. So that was what the memo was. So guess what? This memo, he says in the memo, this information was orally transferred. This is the day after the assassination, the day after the assassination, this memo was orally transmitted to Captain Edwards of the DIA. That other agent could have been him. That was sitting in front of me. And George Bush of the CIA. That's in the Hoover memo now. So, so you see, he's trying to get his ducks all in a line now. You know, Hoover. If you read the testimony Hoover gives to the Warren Commission, it's unbelievable. He doesn't say anything about what he was doing that day because he was in Texas. He can't.
Yeah.
Can't say anything about what he was doing that day. So as far as he's concerned, nothing happened at all until President LBJ calls him that night, okay? And then they have to have a strategy that night. Oh, yes, Hoover's saying, well, we got the guy, is Oswald, and well, what about this Russia thing and all that stuff? Well, we don't know if that's, I don't even think he was we don't even think he was in Mexico. They're talking about all that and everything. And so Hoover says, this is recorded. This is all recorded. And Hoover says, well, I don't have any jurisdiction in this case. Can you believe that? There's no law against assassinating a president, federal law. So he has no jurisdiction. What the fuck was he doing in Texas? But anyway, that's my idea. So he says, I have no jurisdiction. So right away, LBJ says, well, that's why you're in charge of this case. Put you in charge. Over the phone. So now Hoover's in charge of the whole thing. That's how they settled it. And that's the truth. And nobody's been able to prove any of my stories so far.
Well, you know what? It's very interesting. It's very interesting you brought that up because I can send you the recording. Kevin Barrett let me on Truth Jihad Radio. He let me keep a copy of it. I was actually online to be on Kevin's show, and so they always get you on about 10 minutes early. And
Kevin Costner?
No, Kevin Barrett, the guy who has Truth Jihad Radio. He's a really interesting journalist and podcaster. And anyway, I was on they always get you on about 10 or 15 minutes early so that you can do a sound test and all that. And who was on before me was William Pepper. And William Pepper, of course, was the lawyer. I'm sure he probably still is for Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, I think he died.
No, he's still. Well, I don't know. I think he's still around.
No, maybe not. Okay.
But anyway, no, I think he's still around. He's not young, but I think I'll have to verify. Anyway, he was on the show about his new book, The Plot to Kill King, and which of course, Pepper convened an all-white grand jury in Memphis and did years of research, and after a month of testimony in this grand jury, the all-white jury, just because they wanted to make sure people were not biased, the all-white jury only took 90 minutes to convict the United States government of being involved in Martin Luther King's murder. And so anyway, and I've got the book. I'm going to read it this summer. I've got about 1,000 books to read, but it's on my list. I actually have it in my bookshelf. But anyway, at the end of this interview, and I'll send it to you. They were talking about how anyway, I'll skip the Martin Luther King part, and he is now representing Sirhan Sirhan for the RFK murder, because he was obviously a patsy. James Earl Ray was a patsy. In fact, they had him already sequestered 1 week before Martin Luther King was shot. And to set him up, and Sirhan was, of course, another patsy. And at the end of that interview, he talks about how he has signed affidavits of I think it was at Johnson. What's that place called in Washington where the vice president works next to the White House? I can't remember the name of it. The something house, where the vice president is next to the White House. Anyway, LBJ was there, Hoover was there. I think the Joint Chiefs of Staff, somebody from the Joint Chiefs of Staff was there, and somebody representing David Rockefeller, he was from the Chase Manhattan Bank, was there, and he has a signed affidavit that when they had the meeting that night, it was to decide to kill Kennedy, JFK, and the JFK came out, not JFK, I'm sorry, LBJ came out and was bragging that, that son of a bitch is not going to be telling me what to do anymore. And I can't remember the name. It was actually...
It was at the Murchison's house, Clint Murchison in Dallas, where that meeting took place. So Hoover was there that night, the night before the assassination, and LBJ and talked to him, and there were witnesses to that. So the story was.
I think it corroborates your story. I mean, the whole. Yeah. I mean, as Ed Curtin has written, several times. I mean, it's not even debatable. I mean, it's not even. You can't even question whether Kennedy was killed by the CIA and the mafia and the Cuban the Cuban fascists. I mean, it's so obvious, I mean, and what's really interesting, Jim, I don't know if you know this, and I've actually written about this after the Warren Commission came out, which was actually, I think, manipulated by Alan Dulles.
Oh, yeah.
They, who is it? Not Pew, but Gallup. Gallup polling since 1963, every 2 or 3 years, does a poll, a national poll, and after the Warren Commission report came out, never less than 53% of the Americans polled have said that at least 53% of the people in the United States up to today believe that Kennedy was killed, JFK was killed by with the government being involved, and it's gotten as high as 80, and it drops down, but it's always recently it's in the 60s and 70s. So Americans know that JFK was killed by his own government. I mean, it's not even debatable. They know it, but they internalize it because
and they're scared of it because they don't know what to do about it. Nobody knows. Nobody wants to get involved because nobody has all the answers.
Well, and
they made sure that nobody has all the answers.
What can we do? I mean, they blew his brains out on Dealey Square, and
all I can do is tell my story, but I'm chasing the wind,
Yeah. Well, but this is really interesting because it corroborates, a lot of other stuff. Well, tell us, and I do before we get off, and I may split this. I may split this. Interview into two parts, sort of the political part, and then I'd love to talk about your music too. But tell us where Phil Ochs fits into all this, because Ed Curtin wrote an article about pictures.
Yeah, he interviewed me for that.
Yeah, pictures of Phil Ochs in the theater in Dallas.
Right, I found those. Yeah, those are all my pictures. Yep.
And can you tell us where Phil Ochs fits into all this?
Well, beginning when I went to Ohio State, I was supposed to have a roommate who was a friend of my the son of a friend of my parents, the Teppings, and he. So when I went to the rooming house there where we're supposed to be at, he said, "No, you said some mix-up. I'm not having a roommate. I'm not supposed to have a roommate." So it was like, what's another mix-up? So then I had a shoe salesman as a roommate, and then this guy comes down one day and he says into my room, he says, "Jim, you got to help me out. This guy is driving me nuts, playing music upstairs, and I just can't. You ought to go up and just see him. I think he's into music." So I just walked by his room, and he goes, "Hello, Phil." He said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Jim," and introduced myself. And he said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I play folk music and play band." He goes, "Oh, you do? Oh, okay." So then he wanted to be my new roommate right away. So, but he said, "Well, here's the deal. There's going to be a new rooming student dormitory going up called Steve Hall, and he said he had his connections will get us in there right away." So that's what he did, and so we went into this new Steve Hall, and then I started, ROTC was mandatory, so I was private and I was cadet in Army. He was a sergeant in Air Force, Phil Ochs.
You're okay.
Yeah, so he was like.
What university or college
Ohio
was this?
State. Ohio State.
OSU. You're a Buckeye.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, it was a trip. So I was, I would tell him all my stories, about Bush. He was always interested in my story about Bush and all this stuff, and about my my ancestry and all that story, and everything is, and then he says then he started talking about there was a surveillance thing on campus. Well, this guy was in the one of the he wore a red jacket, and there was one of the very radical groups on campus, a Trotskyite type group, and he said this the guy who invented a Nazi scientist who came over, von Buren.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. About.
Yeah, he was a famous Nazi, and so he was saying, "Gee, people don't even know this guy's background." So I said, "Yeah, that's weird. What's he doing speaking on campus?" So I agreed to just go and hold up signs and picket it. You know, we weren't telling everybody not to go on. We just wanted everybody to know who he was. You know. And so when Phil found out, he got real upset. He got real mad. He says, that guy he's a Socialist Workers Party guy, you know. He's no good, you know. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, there's a surveillance program on campus and all this stuff. And so he started, I started, are you spying on me or something? He said, you're fair game, Jim. You're fair game, you know. So it was like a kind of a, you know, it wasn't kind of a love-hate relationship. I didn't really love Phil, but it was interesting that he was really interested in my whole history and everything. But he was probably I was being used to give him credentials as a you know, a leftist, because but he knew, you know, and he talked to my dad. My dad would talk to him about Castro and about the McCarthy period and everything like that, and he liked talking to my dad. And so Sonny Ochs, his sister, said there wouldn't be a Phil Ochs if it wasn't for Jim. And so he, you know, he started writing about. Phil knew a lot about Castro. He knew a lot about everything, you know, and so he started writing articles about Castro and pro articles, and started his own newspaper, mimeographed it right out of our dorm room there in Steve Hall, called The Word. And he was an excellent journalist, Phil. He was a very intelligent guy, much smarter than me. And so he was, and he had this kind of a bossy attitude, you know. Like he wanted to be the leader of a revolution, I think. I was more laid back, you know, and was kind of weary of all this kind of stuff. But I thought we could start a group called the Singing Socialists. And he learned a few songs that I taught him some chords on the guitar, and taught him about folk singing. And the first song he wrote was the Cuban invasion, about the Bay of Pigs. And so we learned that, and he started writing a couple other songs, and so we started singing around campus as the Singing Socialists. And so we went out and did a party at a big Republican bigwig guy there in Columbus, and we sang some songs. And somebody came up to us after and said, "Are you guys communists?" And I kind of laughed, because I've heard the drill before, you know, but it kind of threw Phil, threw him, you know. He was no communist, that's for sure. So, but so he told me after that. He said, you know, Jim, we got to change the name of our group to the Sundowners, because he loved the movie, you know, Robert Mitchum, The Sundowners. Mm-hmm. I said, why do you want to do that? He said, well, it's more euphonious. It sounds better, you know. And so, well, okay. So I kind of went along with it, but it kind of took all the fun out of it, you know, for me. But anyway, so we were the Sundowners, and well, then he was telling me about. He was telling me how to. My story. He says, Jim, you want your story about what you got to do is you got to write letters to all these people in the government, but you got to send copies to everyone. So he's like giving me advice, you know, on how to do it, how to get my story out and everything. And he says, and he said, then he came back one time. He went to New York. I guess his sister Sonny is out there, and he knew some people. And he comes back and he says, "Jim, you got to go to the Village. So Bob Dylan's there, and he's making all kinds of noise, and it's a really big thing." And so we made a deal where we meet up. I was going to drop out because I wasn't doing too well in school. I wanted to drop out before I flunked out, and I was playing the banjo all the time. And Phil was telling me he was reading stories reading to me about Oswald in Russia. He knew about that. He said, "What do you think of this, Jim? What do you think of Cuba?" And I used to have dreams about going to Cuba on a boat or something, because Phil kept talking about Cuba, and he had that song, the Bay of Pigs and everything, and then he says, Kennedy's going to kill Castro. They're going to kill Castro. CIA's going to kill Castro. And I'm going, "What do you mean? I don't think they're going to do it." And so he said, "Yeah, they are." So he knew all about that Operation Mongoose and all that stuff. He knew stuff, and he was kind of special. I think they were using him.
Yeah, it sounds like almost he was he was there early on to watch you, and maybe it sounds. I mean, my gut reaction. I have because I haven't really researched.
Well, I had that impression. Yeah, that
my gut reaction is that he was.
We were set up to meet.
Yeah, he was an agent, or at least a double agent of some kind. Reporting.
He was very, very special guy. He was. They make him feel like he's really important. That's how they get you. And he was very ambitious. He wanted to really make it, and he thought this would work for him. So anyway, in New York, we go to New York, and it's very funny. When I first went to New York, my mom wanted me to go too, and stayed one night at a hotel, my mom, at the St. Moritz, and then I had to go and stay at the YMCA. She went back to Cleveland, and I was supposed to go help one of her friends with a musical. A friend of my mom's was writing a musical, and she was supposed to be there in New York and everything, but my grandmother wanted me to go to the Peppermint Lounge. She said, my cousin Big Saul, he owns the Peppermint Lounge. That's what she thought. She was so you get a job there, So I went over to the Peppermint Lounge, and I meet this little guy there, and it was in the daytime, and he goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, my grandma said Saul Cohn, Big Saul Cohn, owns this place. Maybe I'll get a job singing here." So he goes, takes me upstairs, and he says, he makes a call. And then there was a woman up there too with him, and he says, "Well, Jim, somebody's trying to set you up. Somebody's setting you up." And I was thinking, "Oh, not again," So he says, "Listen, go down to the Village." He says, "That's where all the folk singers go." Oh, okay. So I grabbed my guitar, and I think I had still my suitcase at the YMCA at that point. So I go down to the Village, and I meet this girl there the first night I was there, and she turns out to be Betsy Doster, who is later married one of the guys who knew Paul McCartney. I forget the name of their group, but an English guy. And she warned me too. She said, "You be careful." So I stayed at her place that night. She said, "You got to be careful. There's a lot of strange people, a lot of strange things going on in the Village at that time." Okay, so the next night I meet I go into another coffee house, and it's called the Raffio, and there's Jean, my future wife. She's there singing, and Alice, Phil's, her girlfriend Alice became Phil's wife, and she's waiting tables there. And so Jean invited me to her house that night, and I slept there with her, and then we became an instant duet that very night, my second night in town. So it was all crazy, and so then Phil shows up after I'm with Jean, and we're putting together a duet, and then he wants to have a trio. He comes to New York, and he dropped out of Ohio State just before he was going to graduate, which is very strange. But he wanted to be in New York right then at that time, and so it's funny that we all got. I got to New York. Actually, it was around June of '62, and that just happens to be the same time Oswald shows up in New York from Russia. So it's like everything's on schedule here. It's like really strange. And Phil's dad was he never told me this, but I found out later that his dad's folks, his dad's grandparents, were from Russia, Poland too, just like mine.
Oh.
But he never told me that. But okay. So we had this thing, the old world connection in our genes, I guess. So that's something Alan Dulles would appreciate, I'm sure. So so one day Phil comes over and he says, Jim, there's a plot to kill President Kennedy, and he's saying, and Hoover's the bad guy and all this stuff, and he's with this national security, could have been national security agency, because he says this, I don't know what it was, but it could have been a bunch of different agencies all mixed together, because they do that a lot, and then they call it national security. Multi-agency task force or whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
And they just make up stuff. They can just make up stuff, and they could have been just pulling Phil's leg and make him, using him. So he says, so anyway, if you find out anything out, I said, yeah, if I find anything, I'll let you know. He wanted to know if I knew anything about it. And so he says, well, I'm going off to the Fair Play for Cuba committee and try to find out more. So this
when was this about?
This was it had to be months before the actual assassination. Okay. I have a hard time thinking about it, because once I just blurted out with it, Jean and I weren't even married yet, but I'm not sure exactly how I still, I didn't write it down, so I don't know exactly how many months before the assassination that he said this.
Okay.
But then I remember shortly afterwards, the FBI shows up and they want to know where Phil is. And because Phil told me that Hoover's the bad guy, I didn't tell him anything about any plot to kill Kennedy. So I figured these are the bad guys, and they probably after Phil, whatever. So that's how this whole thing is. I was naive and crazy, I probably should have just told him. I should have just called the White House. This guy Phil Ochs, he's really weird. Is this for real? That's what I should have done. If anything like this ever happens, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to keep anything secret. That's one thing I learned is don't keep anything secret. It's crazy when you keep. So Phil, they were setting Phil up, I think, as for whatever, but he was. So after the tour, the Hootenanny tour, right? I get back to L.A. I'm alive, got back there with Jean, crazy people on the bus and all that stuff. But so I didn't see Phil for months until we got back to New York. I think it was the early '64, somewhere around there probably. And then Phil shows up first time, and we couldn't find Phil. We were looking for him. He was like hiding out. And so he's kind of excited, and he says, where were you? And I tell him about the Hollywood Hootenanny tour and everything. I told you not to go. He says, well, I thought we were doing what you were doing. He says, what were you doing? I said, Phil said, well, I was in Dallas. What were you doing there? He says, I was a national security observer. And I said, would you have a gun? Yeah, I had a gun. I said, come on, Phil, you shot yourself in the leg. They wouldn't give you a gun. He said, oh, okay. No, I didn't have a gun. So so I said, well, how do you know you were there? How can you prove you were there? And he says, well, they were filming me. I was being filmed right across from the book depository at the garage doorway of the Dal-Tex building. I'll go, oh, so I always remembered that, where he was, in front of the garage door. And so I said, well, what are you going to do? Well, we didn't know what the hell to do. Because, I thought, well, maybe the truth will come out and they'll want us to be witnesses or whatever, it's possible. But I was leery about just, reporting what I knew, because I knew where Hoover was. I knew so I knew right away it was, even before we got back to New York, early '64, I started talking to people out in California about all this stuff. We went on a radio show in the mountains someplace, and I wonder if that was Lookout Mountain. Anyway, we were doing the before we did the Hollywood Hootenanny tour. We were on the Andy Williams show as the Good Time Singers, and so after the Kennedy assassination, I got back, and we were going to drop out of the group for good. So I went there to the studio. I think it was NBC, and probably looking for a check or something, and tell them, well, goodbye. Jim and Gene we're going to be a duo on our own now. And we had a record deal coming up, with Jack Linkletter. I still got that old record, and so I'm leaving the studio, and Andy Williams comes up and goes, "Hey Jim, I heard you saw some things in Texas," because I was telling people all about it, and they go, "Yeah." I said, "What was it?" I said, "Well, it was a government operation." And he just looked at me and he just turned around and walked away like he heard enough, He didn't want to hear anymore. I don't blame him, because it was so dangerous. But I didn't know at that time. I found out many years later. My mom told me. She said, "You know that Andy Williams was a pallbearer at RFK's funeral? He was a good friend of RFK." So God. Maybe I'm the first guy that ever got the word RFK about what was going on. But RFK was afraid to talk about it. He was there at the autopsy, and he knew the autopsy was fake. But he had stuff. Yeah. He was worried they were going to kill him too, and the family. He was scared too. Everybody was scared, and they still are. They still are.
Yeah. Well, Teddy Kennedy. Half. It seems like half the kids have been wiped out. It's just the grandkids, and it's just unbelievable. Why do you think? I realize you weren't there, but why do you think when Phil Ochs was in Africa, it seems pretty suspicious that some guy would jump out of a dark street and
there's a couple of guys
slash his throat,
No, he didn't slash his throat.
What'd they do?
Phil told me the story in '74 when I went there, and he told me a lot of things too. In '74, he had autopsy pictures of JFK and a whole bunch of other stuff. And but anyway, he told me about this story. He said, "Jim, this is a puzzle with me." He says he was in there. Went to it was
Zanzibar.
Zanzania,
Zimbabwe? I don't know.
Zanzania. It was that.
Oh, Tanzania.
Right below Uganda.
No, right south of Kenya, Tanzania, just to the
Tanzania,
west.
Yes.
Yeah, just to the east of
Tanzania
of
or Tanzania. Yeah. He was there. And
that's where Mount Kilimanjaro is.
Okay, he says I was there, and he says walked out on the beach. Was on the beach that night, and these two guys jumped me, and they robbed me, and strangled me, and left me on the beach. And he said, found out, he said the funniest thing is he was puzzled because the only thing they stole from him was his knife. He says, they only took my knife. And so he still had his passport, still had his wallet, right? They never reported anything to the cops. So I said, yeah, they were sending a message to you. And he said, that's what I thought. So he always thought the CIA was in on doing that. Now, the thing, because he knew too much or whatever, they're trying to keep him scared, and they did. Phil was always paranoid they were going to kill him because he knew too much. And basically it was because of Dallas. Dallas is what killed him. That's why he killed himself, because he couldn't figure it out, and he couldn't handle it like nobody else. Nobody can handle it that I've found so far.
Where did you find those pictures of him in Dallas when he was in Dallas?
Yeah, it was. I first found it when I first found it. It was like my friend in Cleveland sent me a tape. The Men Who Killed Kennedy, History Channel. And I didn't have a computer or anything like that, but I had a TV, and I played it on the TV. And they're showing the building next to the book depository. And damn it, there's Phil, just where he told me he was being filmed.
They
caught him on camera. He was looking right at the camera, right in the doorway, the garage doorway of the Dal-Tex building. So I said, holy crap, he's telling the truth. So I took my camera, and I'm taking pictures off the TV with my camera. And they're very crude, But I had those pictures, and I started sending them around, and I, would send them to the Congress, investigating all this stuff, whatever. And
what year was that about? What year was that about?
When he sent me that would have been, jeez. Oh, God. I'm not sure. It would look, it was probably after George Bush got elected in '88.
Okay.
When all this other stuff about Bush was coming out, like those memos, about the Kennedy assassination.
Do you still have that History Channel tape?
I might, but it's on the internet. You can.
Okay.
Men Who Killed Kennedy. It's already on the internet. And so, but then when I got my computer and started doing all that stuff, then I went and I ordered a copy of the tape. A CD or DVD, and then I took it to a special guy in Tampa here who does, and he made copies for the computer for it.
Yeah. He took.
So I had all kinds of copies.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had copies of that and a bunch of other stuff that I thought was interesting in that. So that was that, So it wasn't even until I kept looking. I studied Dealey Plaza thoroughly. I think I've seen every picture that was ever taken at Dealey Plaza and more. Every picture that was taken at the Texas Theater too. And so that was a big puzzle about Phil and Tanzania. So he figured that CIA was sending him a message that he wasn't really robbed. He didn't have to go into the embassy and say they got my passport and they got all my wallet and my credit cards and I got to go. No, it was none of that. Didn't report to the police. They only took his knife. So it was a spook session, and they strangled him pretty bad. They thought he lost his voice, but he didn't completely lose it, but it hurt his voice and freaked him out.
Yeah.
So he's telling me this in 74 at his house. And so then we were doing the midnight special show. That's why I was there. He flew me there, and this guy, when I first went there in L.A., the guy who picked me up at the airport was Weberman, A.J. Weberman. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he was one of the first people. He wrote the book with his friend. They wrote a book called Coup d'etat in America. So this was in '74. He picks me up at the airport, little guy, and he says he's there to pick me up, for Phil. He's driving me to Phil's house, and he says, I heard it was a Hollywood trip, the Kennedy Assassination. I said, yeah, tell me about it. Hollywood Hootenanny trip. And see, the Hootenanny was being used, as a cover for this plotters. They hated folk music, Hoover was afraid of folk music, so that's what this whole thing was about. You see, the first people to sing at the Martin Luther King Washington March, where I Have a Dream.
Yeah.
It was Bob Dylan and Joan Baez. They were the big stars. So that folk music was, and in Phil's FBI file, he mentioned right in the first page that he knows What Do You Got Three, and he knows Bob Dylan. There's the names right in the FBI's files. That's why they're interested. See, they're interested in folk singers. So I kind of feel like responsible in a way for Phil, because he got me into this, but I got him into it even more than he got me into it. You know what I mean? So it's like Phil's a total mystery. He couldn't. He got in trouble in South America too.
You sent me that. Yeah, and
yeah, Jesus Christ! I mean,
unbelievable.
It was the embassy that got him out of that, because he called the embassy. It was Kissinger was. Guys came over to my house and told me, serious men. There were 3 or 4 guys that come into my house when I was in New York, staying at Gene's old apartment there, and it was probably during '73 around there. Phil was doing a concert, probably around the time of the Chile concert or something, and they go, Kissinger is paying Phil. I go, oh, really? Well, I didn't deny it, but I didn't want to tell him anything that I knew. Okay. Just acted, okay, so they left. So then when I went out to to see Phil in '74 in L.A., when he's when A.J. Weberman picked me up and all that and stuff, and he told me about Africa. He also told me about South America too, and but he got the guy who his friend there who set him up for that concert where he got in trouble was the National Student Association, which was CIA.
Yeah, and the NSA. Yeah. Were you the one that sent me the article about that? How they got infiltrated? Yeah. It was the Atlantic magazine or something. Had a huge expose.
Yeah, I think I sent you that. I'm not sure. Yeah. Maybe somebody else did, but I sent that to another friend of mine who's doing research on this stuff. And so I said, Phil, guys told me that Kissinger was paying you, and he got real mad, but he didn't deny it. He said, well, I'm working with an Air Force officer, up and coming young Air Force officer, and he gave me a name. I think I know. We're checking it out. I think I know who it is. But he's up and coming. He's a general now. But anyway, he'll probably deny that he knows Phil, because anybody who knows anything about Phil is in Dallas. They don't want to be associated with it. They don't want to say nothing. So that's the problem with all this stuff. These people that I know, they're probably, everybody's going to deny it, but that's the bag I'm in. I'm the guy with the bad news. The truth is nobody likes it. Nobody likes the truth. That's my problem. but I have to live with it, because that's my whole life. I've been the guy that tells the truth, and everybody's afraid of it. They don't know how to deal with it. So that's my bag. But I always felt like Phil is always such a mystery to me. I'm always trying to figure him out, and I haven't been able to figure out everything about Phil. But he committed suicide. A lot of people think, oh, he was suicided and all this stuff, but I don't think so. He talked about suicide very much with all his friends, and he didn't talk about it much with me. Once we were doing a concert for the Chili concert. We were doing a club. It was at one of the clubs where we went in there and they were playing Deep Throat was on the screen. We were singing. Phil was advertising the Chili concert, and Phil said on stage, I even saw it on video because I forgot about it. Phil says, Phil Ochs is dead. So it was at that point he was already determined that it was, curtains for him because it wasn't.
He had an alias. He had an alias of a CIA
John
agent.
Train.
Yeah, John
Train. Also Luke Train. John Train. Now, a lot of people think that John Train is a real guy. Well, he is, and Bush knew him. He was involved in CIA stuff, but he denies. One of my friends got in a hold of him. I got a guy who's doing a lot of work, and he says John Train doesn't know who Phil Ochs is. But John Train was involved in a lot of stuff in South America too. So if he did know Phil, they're not going to say anything because they're not allowed to. This is top secret stuff. I'm sure Phil probably had to sign a secret agreement of some kind. That's standard. That's standard because they want you to know that you can't talk, and if you do, you're in trouble. You do not talk about this. Is secret stuff. So he so he knew that. So he tells me that he was working with this general. Wasn't a general at that time. Was an officer, Air Force, and I said, well, you kept promising we're going to talk about this. We're going to do it. We're going to talk about Dallas and everything like that. And he says, well, they told me that if I talk, they'll say I'm crazy, and then I'm working for them. So that was enough right there to shut up, because he knew he probably would have done more than that. But they're just letting him know, man. He didn't want anybody to know that he had a mental problem either. They say he was crazy. He probably knew he was crazy, and of course he knew that. And
are you? Who are you talking about that had mental problems?
Oh, Phil Ochs.
Phil. Okay, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, he also had a drinking problem and.
Yes.
Yeah. But do you think it's possible that he might have just been totally fucked up by, as a victim, I will say, of MK Ultra? Or do you think maybe
very similar? It's very similar. There's a lot of stories about MK Ultra and
hypnosis and torture.
Yeah, they try to make it as scary as possible. But I think basically they don't have a program like that where we're going to hypnotize you and you're going to go out and kill this guy, like that movie, what the hell is it? Manchurian Candidate, it's made up stuff. But that's what they want you to think, because they want you to be scared about all that stuff. But basically, if they want to use you, they study you and they know everything you like, they know everybody you know. They know all your weaknesses, so they know how to manipulate you.
Yeah.
And so, even in hypnosis, it's about, how we can help you. They use hypnosis for helping you. I just found an article on hypnosis just today, and about Carl Jung.
Yeah, Jung, yeah.
Yeah, he was a big
Swiss psychologist.
Yeah, Alan Dulles was a follower of Jung, and so was Jean, my wife. She majored in psychology. Jean was ahead of me too. She was smarter than me. Phil and Jean are both smarter than me, better educated than I was. But anyway, Jean was very much a follower of Jung. She always would talk about him, and so I'm studying what hypnosis is very about. I'll send you this article on the unconscious mind.
Do.
And so I wrote here I gave a little at the end here. I said my comment for Jim Glover. My wife, Jean Ray Glover, Jim and Jean, was a psychology major and talked a lot about her favorite Carl Jung. As a child, she had polio in her leg and was helped amazingly with the Sister Kenny treatment, which has some similarity or synchronicity to hypnosis, or as they say, mind over matter, along with physical therapy. Jean was a great dancer and singer. Jean also was afraid to talk about the Kennedy assassination. Whenever I talk about it, she wouldn't say, "No, you're lying, Jim." She would just be completely silent. And when we went to in '67, we went to England and France. It was kind of like on a CIA mission there. But when I got to England and Oxford, they invited me to this big dinner, in this big hall, and there were a lot of big English wigs there around, and they were asking me about the Kennedy assassination. So I told them the story, basically, what I in England. And isn't it funny that the one of the files released a couple of years ago was that about 15 minutes before the Kennedy assassination, a caller in Oxford got a call from somebody who said something very important is going to happen very soon. Call your editor and everything that. And it was just picked up by James Angleton. Heard about this and
he's CIA. He was a CIA.
He ran the counterintelligence and sent it to Hoover. So Hoover, that came out. Hoover, that somebody tipped off the British at the same place I'm talking about. In Oxford, right there. And so then we go over and we were a friend of Jean's wanted us to take some documents or something over to France for the anti-Charles de Gaulle demonstrations that were going on there.
CIA hated his guts.
Yeah, so the CIA hated his guts. Yeah. So he anyway, this girl that she then was she told us about it in L.A., but then she was in Paris waiting for us to come. And I guess we brought the documents. Jean had them. We got there. She was scared all of a sudden. Uh-oh. What's she scared about? I don't know. She says, well, go to the Sorbonne tonight. There's a rally. And so we went to the Sorbonne. And then somebody called Jean over to talk to her. A lot of stuff happens when they separate me and Jean. And then I'm sitting there by myself in the front, big audience, and they're having a rally there in the Sorbonne, big hall.
Against de Gaulle.
Yes. And so I hear this guy say, "Hey, Jim," behind me, and I turn around, and he's got a movie camera pointed at me. And so I didn't think much of it. Okay, we're a celebrity, I guess. So, so then many years later, I'm seeing a documentary on the student demonstrations against de Gaulle. And they're saying, and they're showing the Sorbonne, and they're showing this guy from his film, and I can see my back. I'm looking at, and then you don't hear "Hey Jim" because it's just no sound on it. You don't hear his voice.
Back in those days, yeah.
But there, I turn around and I'm looking at the camera, and just as I'm looking at the camera, the narrator's saying, "And there were American agents." In the audience, American agent. So they had me pegged as being an American agent, you see. So
is that film available on YouTube?
I looked for that film after I started talking about it. Like I usually do, my big mouth. They probably took it down, because.
The CIA tried to assassinate de Gaulle at least 6 times.
Well, I believe it. And I believe he wanted to get out of NATO, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he did get out of NATO, and he did. And he wanted to leave Vietnam, and he wanted to. I mean, just the whole everything.
Yeah, he wanted to give Algeria their independence.
Yeah. He was. And the only reason he didn't get killed is because his Secret Service was loyal to him, unlike JFK and RFK.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, in those students' demonstrations. He compromised with those students and was very good to them. He gave them, whatever they were yelling about de Gaulle, he did okay. He wasn't bashing heads or anything like that with these students. It wasn't like New York now. Jesus, New York is all boarded up now. Jesus, it's like can't imagine.
Well, one thing, what I would really recommend, Jim. I mean, this is really, I think, valuable historically. Everything that you have gone through, and it would be wonderful if you could sit down and I don't know who else you could get involved, but if you could just come up with sort of a timeline of when all this happened, it would just be really, I think, useful for historians and researchers in the future.
Well, it might be. It's just my memories. I didn't really write much down, so it's just my stories from my own stories. The thing about my stories is they probably wanted me to tell the story because I'm folk music and it's a folk history what I'm talking about, and that's what folk history is about. It's about somebody's telling his stories, and that's what folk music is about. Somebody tells a story and somebody else tells a story, and it gets changed around and everything. But that's a different. It's a kind of history that is special. I think that's why they wanted me to. LBJ said, well, you can't see all these. They took so many pictures at the autopsy, and all the secret stuff. LBJ said, well, you won't be able to see this for 75 years. So that's what, so that's when I'm like 7 years old. I'll be able to see this stuff. They're never going to they'll never show it. But that's my point, is that this was their out. LBJ knew what was going on. So he said, well, here's the deal. We're going to tell you, we're going to let you see this stuff, but you're going to probably be dead before you get to see it.
Just recently, they had that big JFK, release of information, but Trump withheld something like 300 or 400 documents. Well, those are obviously the 300 or 400 documents that would definitely expose the fact that the CIA was involved, the military or elements thereof, the mafia, the Cuban fascists.
And my report too is there. I reported to the FBI in '91 when I was running against Bush as a dark horse candidate down here in Florida, telling my story.
Oh, Jeb Bush?
No. H.W. Bush, old man Bush.
Okay.
This was in '91. I was running against him. And I told the FBI because I was running against him. I figured, hey, I got to let it all hang out, And then I told him, I called him again 2 years ago and gave him some more information. But anyway, that's what I was doing, And I remember Bush was he was supposed to give a speech at Brandon High School down here, and I heard about it, and I called Brandon High School, and he said, wait a minute, if he's going to speak there, I've got to speak there too, because I'm a candidate here too. And they really? So then I found out that Bush canceled out his speech at Brandon, and then I get a call from Japanese CNN. They wanted me to go down to Miami, Florida, for a dark horse debate with all the dark horse candidates, like crazy people like me running for president. So they paid for my trip down there to Miami. I'm telling the guys about my story about Kennedy assassination. The guy at the bar, from Japanese CNN says, "They're going to kill you, Jim. They're going to definitely kill you."
Well,
it's been a trip.
I asked Douglas. I interviewed Douglas Valentine, and he's exposed all kinds of stuff about the CIA. And I asked him in our interview. I said, "Why haven't they killed you?" And he said, "Well, I think a lot of it is they liked it. It helps them to know what I can find out. It helps them to, who have I contacted? Where did I get my information?" So they almost look upon some of the truth tellers like this. John Potash. I interviewed John Potash twice about his 2 books about all the black musicians that have been assassinated and framed up, and all, Brian Jones and Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Well, haven't they killed him? Well, first off, they're still in power. It hadn't changed a damn thing. And they get and basically they're looked upon as almost like researchers for the CIA, the FBI, etc. So
yeah, so we tell our stories, and then they know what to cover up. And they know that, hey, nobody ever listens to Glover anyway. Nobody ever believes the kid. So they knew that right since I was a kid. So I was perfect for them to be a spy for them. I was their spy. That's why I was on that tour. Because they wanted to. I found out that bus had a camera on it. So everybody on there, Bush, and Hoover, they're all being filmed. So even without me, they had them over a barrel.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Because that would have ruined Bush, and it would have ruined Hoover if it would have been known that they had that bus was a crime scene.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And they had it filmed. It was on film.
Unbelievable.
They had everybody.
Well, hey, listen, go ahead. Anyway, my suggestion is maybe to think about doing some kind of a timeline, or I know you said it would just be, I think, for history's sake, because you've moved around a lot, and and everything that Phil Ochs told you, he moved around a lot. It'd be nice to kind of place some dates and some locales to all this, and I think it would be really, really helpful for researchers in the future.
Well, sure. So, I can. So keep in touch and let me know. I do my best writing when I'm answering questions. I'm a lousy writer when I just sit down and try to tell my story. But I have some of it already written down and saved. So, but I've got so much. I got too much actually. On my computer, I've got all this stuff that I put out. But the best stuff is when somebody's asking me questions and I'm telling them what's going on, and that's when I'm the most focused, I think.
Well, be sure and back everything you have on your hard drive and give it to somebody not in your house that you trust, just in case they try to destroy your computer or whatever.
Well, they've done that a couple of times already.
Oh, they have. Okay.
Yeah, I had to get it all erased, and they'll fuck up my computer so that nothing works, and then I have to take it in and they wipe it clean and start all over again. That's happened to me twice.
Well, you should back it up. You should.
Well, I do have a backup.
Okay.
I do have a backup now.
Get it out of your house and back it up every month or so. That's what I do. Every month I back up on the cloud. And I have a cloud
whatever
drive,
that is.
And then at least it's there, and just in case as a backup. And then I have external hard drives, and I back up on those. So.
Okay, I just got a message now. The disc was not ejected properly. If possible, always eject a disc before unplugging or turning it off. I don't know what they're talking about at this. I'll just hit OK. Okay.
Well, listen.
Whatever you say, guy.
Well, actually, there was one thing I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned in all of our emails that when you were in Laurel Canyon, Topanga Canyon, and all that.
Yeah.
What you said you met Charles Manson? You picked him up as a hitchhiker?
Picked him up. Yeah. I was coming back from the corral. That the club out there, and it was kind of like right on the top of the range where it goes down into the valley. And I'm coming back from the corral, and they picked up a guy and two girls hitchhiking, and he could have been just killing that guy Gary Hinman, that guy they killed, a drug dealer. I think I may have even bought some grass off of him. But so I pick it up, and he starts right in telling me a story. So what are you? I said, I'm a musician. And he goes, oh, I am too, and I've got this deal with the Beach Boys, and but I wasn't. He started telling me his whole life was spent much in prison. I'm thinking, well, this guy's really weird, And so luckily I dropped them off. They got off away from my house someplace. I'm glad I didn't see where I lived anyway. But then I realized that was Charlie Manson I picked up.
Well,
he was telling me his whole story.
I've got to read Dave McGowan's book. Weird Scenes. What is that book?
Laurel Canyon.
Yeah, Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
I've got to read that. I'm going to order it and buy it because John Potash referred to it. With his book about drugs. How they use drugs to fuck all the musicians up and glorify drug use and anyway, and I read Dave McGowan's great book about the moon landing as a gigantic hoax, which was obviously very, very right. When you read it, you just can see that it's impossible that we went. But anyway, so Dave McGowan was quite a guy, and anyway, apparently that book, the Laurel Canyon Weird Scenes from the Laurel Canyon, is quite good. Have you read it?
I read a lot excerpts of it. Yeah, you can get a lot of excerpts from it on the internet, I think.
He's on it's on the web. To honor the guy, I'm going to buy the book, and apparently he added a lot of stuff to the print book. And
okay.
And well, listen, before we
I don't believe that thing about the moon landing, though. I don't think that's. I don't buy that, but that's okay. We can't agree on everything.
That's right. We'll read Dave McGowan's book. It's online, and once you read it, you're like going, there's no way we landed on the moon with a computer the size of a Texas Instrument calculator from 1968. Just
amazing stuff. Yeah.
But anyway, let's talk a little before we leave, and because I actually wanted to talk. My first questions that I wanted to ask you about was your music, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Who taught you to play the guitar and banjo, and who inspired you to pen your lyrics?
My folks had record players, and my mom said I started playing the records as soon as I could walk, and I loved listening to records. And then my dad took me to a Pete Seeger concert once, and I go, oh, wow, I can do that. And then my brother-in-law Roy taught me some guitar, and then I got interested in the banjo, listening to the Weavers, Pete Seeger and all that stuff, good stuff. My folks had a lot of records, and so then I bought Pete Seeger's book, How to Play the Five-String Banjo.
Okay.
I tried learning bluegrass, but that's really hard, But nowadays, I have essential tremors. That's what they call them. And so my hands are pretty shaky when I try to be. I used to be able to be pretty steady on the guitar, and when I listen to some of my old stuff, I go, how the hell did I do that, And I just can't do it anymore. There's no fucking way. So, but I still have my guitar here, and I love to just horse around with it once in a while, and just fun messing around with it. I haven't been doing it much lately. I'm still on the internet arguing with these lone nutters, that believe in the Warren Commission, and it's just amazing when you're dealing with these people that they don't. All they do is ridicule. You'll give them stuff that's even been researched and documented, and oh no, they don't. They think it's all junk and everything. It's so I'm kind of like losing interest in trying to convince people that have already made up their minds. It's kind of like chasing the wind.
Well, they're actually in the minority because since 1963, every Gallup poll ever done in the United States shows that the majority of the Americans know that their government killed Kennedy. So, but I guess it's just the sense of helplessness and being powerless to do anything about it. I think that's probably the most frustrating thing. I mean, what do you do? Where do you start?
Yeah, right.
It's just unbelievable.
They're going to be, I've signed so many petitions of starting a new investigation, but they're not. I don't see how they're going to investigate this because it hurts are, you're not even allowed to release anything that might hurt the government's reputation or hurt foreign relations, right? You can't. So it's against the law, basically, for these people to say anything, that know anything. They're not allowed. And they've already signed secrecy agreements anyway. So, how can there be a real investigation? There can't. There's just stories. People who remember stuff. That's where I come in, I guess, because the documents don't. Maybe stories are better than documents, because the documents haven't changed anything, have they? We've got all these documents.
Well, and the really incriminating ones are going to hide. Just like Trump, kept, I think it was 300 or 400 documents out of the thousands that were released. Well, he kept the 300 or 400 that were the smoking guns. So.
Well, yeah. Well, they say, well, the reason why they won't release them is because innocent people will get hurt. I said, well, they say that about every investigation because, for one thing, you can black out names of people, there's ways of doing this. And besides, there was a law passed that they have to release this stuff 2 years ago, but they haven't done it. So they're violating the law by trying to say, well, we're going to hurt innocent people. That's bullshit because you can redact names. And you can have a judge or somebody who has the clearance to really look at whatever it is and look at whatever the names are. I mean, there's ways they do this, but they don't want to. They don't want to face reality, and I don't think it's ever going to. I think it's I read the first book I read was by Gerald Ford, Portrait of an Assassin, and they never did answer who was Agent 179, which was supposed to have been Oswald's informant number, but one thing he said was true. He said this debate will go on for 1,000 years. He realized that they couldn't prove it because there wasn't a trial. This was, and everybody knows that LBJ gave the order to find Oswald guilty with no Confederates at large. So only use that evidence because it's for national security. And he warned everybody that if we don't, I'll have to bomb Russia because he has a Russian wife, or he wanted to go to Cuba, or all this bullshit, So the whole thing was set up so nobody could ever find the truth because it's national security. It's like we lied to save the world from nuclear war. We had to. So that they sold that, and they, Warren bought it. Earl Warren, all these guys, they bought that argument. He's got a Russian wife. There, the Congress wants to look into this. We got to have a commission to just, get rid of this. It was, and he's talking to Hoover. Well, this is just a local murder. It's just a local murder. We can't let this, screw up our country. When they get away with it, but it's documented. All the stuff I just said is all documented. But what does it do? Does it change anything? Not really. Not really. Yeah. It's it's part of history that we, I'm probably going to have to deal with the rest of my life. But at least it makes my life interesting. At least I'm not bored yet.
I can imagine.
It is an adventure in a way. I think that's what Phil liked too. It's it's a mystery about Phil. Why he couldn't. He couldn't come out and say that he was working for the government because he had a double personality. One was Phil Ochs, the folk singer, the real for social equality and all this stuff and everything.
Anti-war,
and he was, but he had a dual personality. His John Train was like his CIA spy side, and he couldn't. So CIA spy side John Train had to kill Phil Ochs because Phil Ochs basically was too afraid to tell the truth. Yeah. And I can see why. Who has told the truth? Who has? Well,
amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It is amazing, I must say.
Well, I hope. Well, this will get heard by a lot of people that have never don't know about you, and since it's I have a lot of international reach, and it's fascinating and frustrating at the same time because, like you said, nothing's gonna nothing's going to change. But but it would be interesting for you to try to get as much of this down for researchers in the future, and if you can, whatever it is you have, I mean, I'll be happy to put it in my create a page for you on China Rising Radio Sinoland with all of your documents and stuff for the whole world to access if you want. I'd be happy to do that. It's kind of as a research file, as a research directory, and so that people can access it. I'd be happy to do that because I'm actually the curator of the Bioweapon Truth Commission, and we've got quite a library of about bioweapons and chemical weapons, and I
guess everybody's working on those too, probably.
And your story about the Cuba, the biochemical cancer thing is really intriguing, and I'll have to look up.
Her book
Judith
is called
Baker's.
Judith
What is it
Baker, Lee and Me. It's about Lee and Oswald and me.
Lee and Me.
Or Me and Lee, one other. It's the story of Judith Baker and Lee Harvey Oswald. And there's so much stuff on the internet too that you can find for free too. Her story is all over the place. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to get the book. In that book, there's that story about the two black guys that were killed and all.
Oh
that.
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's on the History Channel too. She's got a new one that put out on the History Channel where she tells the whole story. We're being in New Orleans and knowing Lee Oswald and what they were up to. That Lee wasn't a communist at all. He was acting the part that was his mission.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. Maybe it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Well, Jeff, thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you for talking and telling the world. I just think it's almost like when you hear all that you went through in your life, and after John Potash and how and Chairman Fred and how Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. I interviewed him, and you just see how involved the deep state, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the ATF, the IRS. I mean, it's just like everybody. It's we live in like a plasticine world of just surreal. It's like the Matrix, I mean, it really is. It's like we live in a freaking Matrix.
Yeah.
And the fact that they would go to that much trouble, to seek out people like Phil and you and Gene and everybody else, and kill Brian Jones and kill Jimi Hendrix and and Tupac Shakur and so many others. You just was like, what the West is just like a gigantic lie. I mean, we don't have democracy. We live in a very contrived, almost like simulacrum of democracy. It's pretty scary, actually.
Well, some of us are talking about it, and at least we have the ability so far to talk about it.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, so I know in some countries you can't even talk about it, what's going on there in their countries. But at least we got that. I'm going to hold on to that.
Yeah. Well, we need to hold on to something.
We're screwed up, but at least we can talk about it. Thanks. Thanks for talking about it. I know you were born in the U.S., weren't you?
Yeah. I grew up in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, yeah. Remember they had a club called the Budai there, and Pop Brainerd. It was a great folk club. And that's where I met that folk group that sang "One Took Over the Line," "Sweet Jesus."
Oh yeah. Where was Pop Brainerd's club?
Oh, it was in Oklahoma City.
What was it called?
The Budai.
Oh,
the Budai. You can find it on the internet. The Budai, yeah. It was,
the Budai?
Yeah, Buddi, I guess.
Budai.
like
Okay.
like a Buddha.
Okay.
Like the Buddha.
Okay, Budai. Okay. I
Yep,
didn't.
yep.
I wonder if it's still around. I never saw that.
Oh, no, probably closed up in the
Yeah.
70s, 60s,
Yeah.
70s. But
That's
that was
really
one of the first places we played after after the Kennedy assassination. We had a gig there. That's when the Beatles first came out. I remember seeing their first album in the record store window. Yeah.
One toke over the line, sweet Jesus.
Yeah,
one
that's it. Yeah. Brewer and Shipley.
Yeah, that's
Brewer
right.
Mike Brewer. Yeah. Shipley was from Cleveland.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Tom Shipley. I knew him in Cleveland.
Unbelievable. Well, listen, it's late for you. My gosh, it's after midnight for you.
I bet. Yeah. Okay.
It's like 1:30. No, it's 11:30 in the evening for you, right?
Yeah. For me, it's let me see what time it is. Yeah, it's 1:30.
1:30. My gosh.
1:30 now. Yeah.
In
So.
the morning. Okay. Well, listen.
So if you ever come to Florida, look me up.
I've got a bunch of people in Florida to meet, and when I go back to the States the next time, I've got to do a Florida tour and see all these people. I've got relatives down there. I've got friends down there, and I've just got a lot of people. My wife and I need to spend about a month in Florida just to see all the people we know there. So looking forward to shaking your hand sooner than later. And Jim, this is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland in Chiang Mai, Thailand. We just had one of the most amazing interviews with Jim Glover, singer, songwriter, troubadour, revolutionary songwriter, and who has probably one of the most exotic and exciting and interesting life stories I've ever heard. It's unbelievable.
Well,
so
it is unbelievable.
Thank you for being on.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
As soon as I put this up, I will get it to you so you can put it on your Facebook.
Wow, great.
All
right.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.